So although the Veda, the hymns of the Veda are in theory Shruti, they're the highest literature, Apaurushaya, in actual practice would be very hard pressed to find any Hindus in Britain or around the world who have ever read a single word of the Veda. I recall when the very first time we taught this class to a Hindu group, and I think there was a Brahmin group as well, I asked, what do you know about the Upanishads? And there was a silence for a minute, and then a voice somewhere from the back said, "We know they exist." And I think that's fairly typical. And it wasn't that these people were bad Hindus who had been negligent in their scriptural study. I think that just reflected the fact that although the texts of the Veda have that theoretical status as the topmost scripture, in the actual practice of the lived tradition they're of relatively minor importance. Now the Shruti itself can be divided, and is divided, into two broad categories, one of which is designated as the Karma Kand, the ritual portion, and then there's the Jnana Kand, which is the philosophical wisdom. Now within the Karma Kand there are prescriptions for how to perform a particular type of ritual. But the ritual that is referred to there within the Veda is not the ritual that is widely practiced in modern Hinduism. It's the fire yajna, the making of offerings into the sacred fire. Moreover, the deities, the gods, the forms of God who are revered in the hymns that are chanted during this ritual, the Vedic hymns, they are not the gods who are worshipped in contemporary Hinduism. Contemporary Hinduism, the major ritual is that of Murti Puja, which is practiced in the temple. That's not referred to, I think I can say without contradiction, anywhere in the Veda. There's no reference at all to Murti Puja. Moreover, the main gods who are worshipped today, or the main forms of God, Shiva, Vishnu, play a relatively minor role within the Veda. Within the Vedic hymns, the main object of worship, the main deity, is Indra, followed by Agni, the god of fire, Varuna, Soma, and then a range of other gods. So although the Veda, the Vedic hymns, do have a very significant status in theory in Hinduism, in actual fact they are to some extent irrelevant to the practice of modern Hinduism. And in fact the major function of the Vedic literature is of a liturgical nature. So if we attend a wedding, for example, a Hindu wedding, we will hear the hymns of the Veda recited, but the function there is not to give us teaching, and in fact, unless they're explained in the local language, in English, probably nobody, perhaps not even the priest, will know what they mean, what they're saying. But nonetheless, the belief is that the very sound itself is sacred, and we'll talk more about this when we consider Hindu religious practice. But so in a sense it doesn't matter that a person doesn't know what the meaning of the sound is, because the sound itself is sacred, and the hearing of the sound has a purifying effect. Just like at the beginning of a lot of Hindu meetings we attend, they'll chant the Gayatri mantra, Om Bhur Bhuvaha Swaha Tat Savitur Varenyam Bhargo Devasya Dhimahi Dio Yo Naha Prachodayat. And the majority of people won't know, I think, what that means. In fact, probably nobody knows what it means. But still, there's a sense that this sound coming down through countless millennia is in and of itself sacred, and therefore it has that liturgical usage of purifying both the chanter and the hearer. Okay, that's the Karma Kand part of the Veda, which relates to the performance of the Vedic ritual, the veneration of gods such as Indra, Soma, Varuna by means of offerings into the sacred fire, accompanied by the chanting of hymns. Now if we look at the other part of the Veda, the other broad category, which is known as Jnana Kand, the wisdom section, and that specifically focuses upon the Upanishads. And again, although the Upanishads are not widely known or studied within the Hindu community, they are, I think, very significant in establishing some of the principal Hindu doctrines. In fact, some of the principal Buddhist doctrines as well are derived from the Upanishads. So within the Upanishads we have the idea of rebirth, the idea that the soul transmigrates. That's found within the Chandogya Upanishad. We also have the idea that the process of transmigration is carried forward on the basis of the actions that are performed by an individual. It's a familiar idea in East and West today, the idea of karma, that if I act righteously I will reap a reward, and if I act unrighteously, viciously towards others, then that will suffering will come to me as a result of that. The doctrine of karma, that is also found within the Upanishads, the idea that we create our own destiny, and also the idea of liberation from rebirth, the notion of moksha. That is a central theme of the Upanishads, and we'll in a future course we will look at these teachings in more detail, but for now we can just say that this idea is there. And I would also say that particularly within the Upanishads, the way of gaining moksha is through jnana. The Upanishads seem to emphasize the idea of the identity of my own self, the Atman, with the Absolute, with God, if you like, with Brahman. I think it's the Mandukya Upanishad which states, I am Atma Brahma. This Atman is Brahman. This self is God. And elsewhere it says, Sarvam Kalavidam Brahma. Everything is Brahman. So this idea, and the idea then becomes, at the moment I have this notion of myself. I am Nick Sutton. I am a teacher. I am living in Birmingham most of the time, and that's my identity. But the Upanishad teaches that there is a higher identity of the Atman, which is identical with Brahman. And if I can transfer my consciousness from the understanding myself as the limited identity to the higher identity, then I become that higher identity. I am, if you like, what I think myself to be. So at the moment I think myself to be this person, but if I could realise myself as Brahman, then I would in fact exist as Brahman, and then at that point rebirth stops. There is no more suffering of rebirth. So that idea also is contained within the Upanishads. So we can see from that although perhaps the Upanishads aren't widely known and studied within the Hindu community, which is perhaps unfortunate, because when we've taught Upanishad courses in the community, I think a lot of people find them absolutely fascinating and stimulating. I think a few months ago in Birmingham we were teaching the Kena Upanishad, and everybody loved it, thought it was absolutely brilliant, wonderful. It is actually, the Kena Upanishad is wonderful. But so I think it is unfortunate. I think it would be great if we could open it up. But as it stands, the Upanishads, they are a little difficult. I think it's fair to say they're not an easy read in the sense that, of course, maybe the Ramayana is, and perhaps even the Gita is a little bit easier. So for that reason, they are. They're not immediately accessible to the mass of the people. Okay, moving on then from the Veda itself, the next category of literature, or the second category of literature, is known as Smriti, which is the creation of individual sages, the revelation of sages, not coming from this eternal source, but their own realizations based on the revelation of the Veda. And I would say particularly prominent within the Smriti are the two great, what we know in the West as the two great Hindu epics, the Valmiki Ramayana and the Mahabharata. And again we have several copies. I can get a copy here. Here's the Srimad Valmiki Ramayana, one volume of 3. Which gives us the text of, with an English translation there, published by Gita Press in Gorakhpur. And this is a part of a wonderful edition of the critical Sanskrit text of the Mahabharata. Now these works are very, very familiar, in fact ubiquitous, I would say, within the Hindu tradition. Virtually wherever you go in India, you bump into the Ramayana and you bump into the Mahabharata in the cinema, on the stage, even in general discourse. Everybody knows the stories. People know stories that aren't even in the books, about the books. There's a whole corpus of literature based on the Ramayana and Mahabharata, and I would say it's woven into the fabric of Indian culture.